Hello, welcome to the Food Web's video notes. We are going to discuss the way that energy is transferred within the planet, starting with the plants and moving up through all of the different animals that are going to get energy from the plants or animals that ate the plants. So, in a particular area, we're going to have some individuals that are the same species. They live in the same place, and we call that a population. So in the picture, we see a population of giraffe living out somewhere in the African savanna. When you have a bunch of different populations all living in the same area, then you are going to see what's called a community. So in the picture, we're sticking with the African savanna. There's the giraffe, along with a population of lions, leopards, cheetahs, meerkats, some different kinds of monkeys, zebra, uh, and all of these, some rhino here, an elephant, all of these different creatures living together in the same area form a community. When you combine the community of living organisms along with all the non living things that are essential for survival that are also in that environment, you have an ecosystem. So, non living things that are essential for the survival of species and communities in a certain ecosystem include the air, the water, the minerals, the soil. All of these things are going to interact together and they will inform whether or not the organisms can be successful. Natural selection is going to occur in these areas with the populations that are within the community, and that is happening because of the different non-living factors that affect the population. So within our ecosystem, there are different types of organisms. So the producers are going to be like plants on land, phytoplankton in the ocean, and these organisms make their own food. A producer is going to use sunlight and chemicals and water and different minerals and some other components in order to produce their own food in the form of glucose. Glucose is a type of sugar. Consumers are organisms that cannot make their own food. So this is anything that must eat in order to survive. So consumers have another interesting name called a heterotroph. And producers actually have another interesting name, and that would be autotroph. So autotroph, they automatically make their food. Heterotroph, they have to go elsewhere to get their food and their energy. Different kinds of consumers exist as well. We have predators. These are animals that eat other animals in order to survive. And we have prey, animals that are hunted and killed by some other animal for food. You see in the picture, it is a lion who is a predator and a zebra who is their prey. Other types of consumers include different categories based on what they eat. So herbivores, this says they eat only plants. Let's broaden that a little bit. Herbivores prefer plants, but then you have what's called an opportunistic herbivore, like a deer, and they mostly eat plants. That's what they prefer. But if a lizard is a little too slow, or if there happens to be a dead body over there that no other animal is consuming, a deer might go nibble on those things as well. They're opportunistic. If the opportunity presents itself, they will eat those other things. Then you have carnivores. Again, let's expand this from only eating animals to preferring animals. So the carnivores do prefer meat. That's what they really want. But again, you have your opportunistic carnivores. Think about dogs and foxes and some species of bear we can call opportunistic carnivores. If there's something else over there that's edible and delicious, yeah, they'll eat that too, but they really do prefer meat. Now, on the other side of opportunistic carnivores or herbivores, there are obligate carnivores and obligate herbivores. Obligate, I want you to think of the word obligation. That means it's something you have to do. So, obligate herbivores, they have to eat plants. Think about koalas and pandas. They have a specialized diet of only specific plants. Then you have obligate carnivores. Think about cats. Think about alligators, polar bears. They are obligate carnivores. They got to eat meat. Then you have omnivores. An omnivore really doesn't have a preference. They like a little bit of vegetable, they like a little bit of meat. They'll mix it all together, put it on the same dish. Like a human, will have a steak and a salad at the same time and be very happy with how they complement each other. Bears, some types of bears are omnivores, some are opportunistic carnivores, some bears are obligate carnivores. Bears are very interesting as a group of animals with all of their various things that they eat. Then we have scavengers. Listen, scavengers, they want the dead bodies, okay? They want not just dead, but they will eat the rotting flesh. They don't really go out there and hunt very much. They literally have good senses of smells and they run out and they're like, okay, I smell this rotting flesh and I tell you what, that's what I want to eat. And that is what your scavengers prefer to eat. They prefer the rotting flesh. They have an immune system and their gut are so strong that they can actually neutralize any of the harmful microbes and bacteria that would harm a creature like a human that cannot eat those dead bodies and expect to survive. Scavengers are super important because they help clean up the environment. They help with the process of breaking down the dead bodies and returning those nutrients to the soil to recycle the nutrition. Decomposers are going to sort of finish up this job of recycling nutrients. So, the difference between a scavenger and a decomposer is a decomposer, their waste products can actually improve soil quality and help plants live. A scavenger's waste products still need to be broken down into their individual chemical parts by a decomposer. So that's the big difference between a decomposer and a scavenger. So we talked about the different types of organisms in a ecosystem. We talked about the producers that make their own food, the consumers that have to go out and get food from other sources. So we talked about how they get their food. We talked about predators and prey. We talked about whether or not the animal is hunted for food. Then we talked about carnivores, herbivores, omnivores, scavengers, decomposers. So we talked about what they prefer to eat. Now we can also discuss food webs and ecosystems based on when the organisms get to eat. So if you look at the pyramid over here, you'll see that there's this wide base that narrows down a lot at the top. So this wide base is all of your producers. There's a whole lot of producers. The first organisms that get energy from the producers are called primary consumers. They are going to eat producers, they're going to be herbivores, they're going to be omnivores. The next level of organisms that get energy from producers, they are going to be secondary consumers. So your producers are eaten by primary consumers who get energy first. The primary consumers are eaten by secondary consumers that get their energy second. The secondary consumers are eaten by tertiary consumers that get their energy third. So now we're talking about carnivores and maybe a few omnivores. Last but not least, we have a quaternary consumer. I want you to focus on the term apex predator. So these are not eaten by other animals. They are going to eat the tertiary consumers. They just eat all these other consumers. And they're not hunted for food. Think about tigers, alligator. Well, so, some alligators in the Amazon jaguars are going to eat caimans. Um, and then in some ecosystems, the alligator is going to be an apex predator. So there's another interesting thing, right? It depends on where you're at. Different ecosystems have different food webs. So, an apex predator in one ecosystem, in one food web, might not be an apex predator in a different food web of a different ecosystem. So, there's a little something to keep in mind. But the apex predators, they're carnivores, they're omnivores. They're not naturally hunted by other organisms. Like polar bear is a great example. Nothing's out there trying to eat polar bears. Orca whales, I have not heard of any natural predators for orca whales. So when you take all of these organisms and you start connecting how they transfer energy and you start putting together the different creatures by how they eat, what they eat, when they eat, right? You can build yourself a food chain. The food chain is going to be a model and it shows you how organisms interact. It shows you the energy transfer that occurs within ecosystems. It's a pretty simple model. It may be going in a straight line. It may be like this particular food chain that sort of goes in a circle. The thing that distinguishes a food chain is it just shows one line of interactions and it does not give you all the information that is available because there's a variety of organisms at any level within an ecosystem. So the food chain doesn't really give you all the information. What you can find out is how the energy transfers, and you use the arrows. The arrows are like tattletales. So imagine somebody runs up to the teacher and says, "Teacher, teacher, someone ate your food." And I say, "Who ate my food?" And then everybody points to the kid who ate my food, the kid who took my honey buns off the desk. Everybody points to them, right? The arrows do the same thing. So if the animals were out here gossiping about each other and talking about who was eating what, and someone said, oh, "Who was eating all the grasshoppers?" Everybody points to the frog. The arrow is pointing to the frog. The frog is getting tattletaled on. The arrow is tattletaling. The arrow is telling you who gets food and also who gets eaten. If the arrow points away from you, I'm so sorry to tell you, you are a food source. If the arrow points towards you, congratulations, you get a meal. So a food web is a much more complicated model that shows the network of food chains in an ecosystem. It lets you see how energy and nutrients are passed through different living things, and there are multiple pathways. And again, the arrows are the tattletales, and they tell you how the energy is transferred. So the grass down here, nothing points to the grass because the grass is not going to directly consume any other organism. The grass is using sunlight for photosynthesis to make its own food. The arrow from the grass goes to the grasshopper. From the grasshopper, there's an arrow to the bird. From the bird, there's an arrow to the snake. From the snake, there's an arrow to the hawk. If you were to investigate this food web, you would see producers here at the bottom. I have 1, 2, 3 primary consumers. Those are organisms eating producers. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, wait. Let's make sure. 1, 2. I have three. I have 3 secondary consumers. Wait. I have 4 secondary consumers. See how I got to stop and think about this. So the fox is eating another animal. The owl is eating another animal. The frog is eating another animal. The bird is eating another animal. And the animals they're eating are all. Oh, the hawk also could be a secondary consumer. Yep. So see how I have to stop and think about this because food webs are rather complex, right? So the snake is not a secondary consumer, but the bird, the frog, the owl, the hawk, and the fox are secondary consumers. The snake is a tertiary consumer. See, there's the primary consumer is the grasshopper. The secondary consumer eaten by the snake could be a bird or a frog, and then the snake will eat third. The snake is 3 steps away from the grass. It's the tertiary consumer. The hawk is the apex predator. Nothing is eating the hawk. The hawk is eating a lot of other stuff. The hawk could also be considered a secondary consumer because it eats right after the mouse. The hawk is a carnivore. The hawk is a predator. The hawk is a consumer. So all of our terms that we just learned, we can apply to the food web. If I said, what are the herbivores? You would tell me the grasshopper, the mouse, the rabbit. If I asked you, what are the omnivores? Interestingly, there are no omnivores in this particular food web. So we got herbivores and then we got a bunch of carnivores. And it does not show any scavengers or decomposers. It does not show the sun. So let's talk about that real quick. In a food web or a food chain, a lot of times we just sort of take for granted, okay, well, the primary energy source for the producers is going to be the sun, right? So we may not include that. You might see it, you might not. And we also take for granted that at the end of a food web, at the end of all these food webs and at the end of all the food chains in a food web, there are decomposers that are going to break down everything and return those nutrients back to the soil. So they might not be included in your food webs and food chains, the sun and the decomposers. So we just learned about all of these different things going on in an ecosystem. Each organism has a niche or a niche. This is a potato type word. The niche of the organism is going to include the role that it has. So we need to think about, what does it eat? What eats it? Where does it live? How does it interact with other species? And every organism has some kind of role to play. So if we look at an example of having grain out in a field, grain and seeds and grass in a field, and the mouse population is in the field, and the fact that the mice are eaten by cats, then we see that there's different role these organisms play. The grass and the seeds are providing food for the mouse. The mice are going to help keep the population of the plants at a reasonable level. Because if you have too many plants, the plants will start to suffer as well, because there won't be enough nutrients in the soil, there won't be enough rain, there won't be enough sunlight, and the plant population can suffer if there's too many plants in an area. So one role for the mouse is to help control the plant population. Now the mouse has another job too. It is a food source for the cat. So the cats, their job is to control the mouse population. Now, why would we need to control the mouse population? Okay, sit with me. Let's do a little thought experiment. Let's say this year, 2026, all of the cats that live in the field where the mice live with the grain and the grass, let's say in 2026, every single cat is rounded up by the Humane Society and they end up in a loving home. Now there are no cats. The mice are ready. They're happy about this. They're not getting eaten. They're just out here eating the grass and the seeds and having a great time. They're reproducing. There's mice all over the place. So, what do you think is going to happen in 2027 when we have this huge mouse population? Gigantic mouse population and not a cat in sight to help keep that mouse population in check. Eventually, those mice are going to run out of food. Eventually, they may eat the grass and the seeds down to the point where they can't grow back, or it takes a lot longer to grow back. So now it's 2027. There's no cats. There's way too many mice. There's not enough grass. What happens to the mouse population? The mouse population is now going to start to decline. There will be starvation. There will be fighting amongst the mice for food, shelter, and mates, more so than there might already be because there's such a limited supply because there's too many mice. So, 2027, we see a devastating blow to the mouse population. Just a few are surviving, not that many. And then a cat moves in 2028. So now it's 2028, a cat has moved back in, there's a really low mouse population. If too many cats come back to the area, they could eat all the mice up. There are no mice left to reproduce. The grass gets a little break. The grass can start to grow back. We'll get more seeds. We'll get more grass. But the mouse population has collapsed. So what's going to happen to the cats? The cats no longer have food. So every organism has a job, and it's important to not remove organisms from their environment in order to maintain the balance that is in the ecosystem. Energy transfer is not efficient. So, efficiency means that you're working to your fullest capacity, you're using resources extremely wisely, nothing goes to waste, right? Energy transfer it's a process that does not have a lot of efficiency. Why? Every organism that is eating is having chemical reactions. Those chemical reactions that literally just keep you alive, not even helping you grow, just keeping you alive, right? You need a certain amount of calories to stay alive, and then more calories than that can help you grow. So the organisms, just to live, about 90% of the calories that they intake, that they eat, that they consume, is going to be burned up in chemical reactions, and the chemical energy will transform into thermal energy. And that is where about 90% of the energy goes from the producers to the primary consumers. Only 10% of the original amount of energy is available there. And then to the next level, we only have 1%. And to the third level, 1/10 of 1% of the energy that we started with is available to keep those tertiary consumers alive. When you look at this energy pyramid, you see the bottom is large, the bottom is wide, because it's representing the fact that there's so much energy down at the bottom of that pyramid. But as you go up, 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 you're losing energy. Or I should say, the energy is being converted to heat, which means it is no longer available for the organisms to use in order to live. So that's why there's a lot of producers in order to maintain a really small population of apex predators. An example that I use is thinking about the cats and the mice again, right? So you have one cat living in a field, and each cat, well, the cat needs to eat one mouse every day in order to survive. Fine. In a month, the cat needs to eat 30 mice. Now, the mouse, for every month it's alive, is going to eat 1 pound of grain. So the mouse, to live for a month, needs a pound of grain. The cat, to live for a month, needs 30 mice. So, in order for one cat to live, it needs to eat the equivalent of 30 pounds of grain because it has to eat 30 mice, and each mouse needs 1 pound of grain per month to live. Now, these numbers are kind of made up, but hopefully they're helping you understand. What's going on in the ecosystem is that you just got a whole lot of energy down at the bottom, but not much of it moves up through the ecosystem. So that's why you have a really small population of apex predators. That's why the pyramid gets smaller the further up, up, up you move through it. Thank you for joining us in the slides here. We are going to look really quickly at some of the answers for the homework if you were absent. and you want to know whether or not you were correct, let's go ahead and take a gander at the homework. So the food web's notes. On the front, your answers will vary for question number 1. It just says summarize part A in a couple of sentences. Basically, every creature needs energy. The sun gives energy to plants. Plants give energy to animals. Animals sometimes get energy from different animals. Eventually, they die. They're broken down, and the nutrients are recycled and used by the plants to continue the circle of life. And then we had our definitions and we circled some examples. So the examples for herbivores were deer, koala,